Hi, hello, and welcome back to Everso. This will be the continuation of the Clairvoyant Boy through chapter 5 and 6. Chapter 5, The Ghosts of Reluctance. Izuku nervously fiddled with his fingers while he waited. He knows that Shirakuma was probably still mad at him, but Izuku really didn't want to risk possibly ditching him. Besides, Izuku had plenty of practice waiting for people to meet him somewhere and end up getting stood up. He had perfected the amount of time he would wait before he decided to call it quits and go home. When Izuku felt a pair of eyes on him, he turned. He could easily spot the owner of the purple eyes, who was standing on the other side of the entrance gates. The familiar purple hair blew around the harsh winds, Izuku's own hair doing the same. Shinzo blinked in surprise when he realized Izuku was staring back at him, and then quickly averted his gaze. Shinzo seemed to be contemplating something as he kept quickly gazing up at Izuku with a look of indecisiveness. Eventually, the taller team made up his mind and hesitantly inched closer to Izuku, doing his best to fend off his nerves. When Izuku realized what Shinzo was doing, it was his turn to be surprised. He slightly lifted his hand and shyly waved at the other teen. Shinzo waved back before standing beside Izuku. The two stood in an uncomfortable silence for an awkwardly long amount of time. Hi, Shinzo Hitoshi. The taller teen finally croaked when the silence became too much for him to handle. Shinzo started to rub at the back of his neck. Mr. Izuku, I sat behind you in class, Izuku replied while scanning the crowd for a certain ghost. Shinzo smirked slightly. I know. You're the boy who speaks 1,000 languages, right? Izuku huffed. What was with everyone saying that? For sure, come on, now Shinzo. Izuku's going to rage. He spoke 5 languages, but everyone he met seems to think he spoke millions. Technically, he didn't even speak 2 of them because he just used his hands. Well, technically, I only speak 3 as 2 of them don't use words. Izuku internally cringed as soon as he finished speaking. He sounded like a total nerd. Shinzo seemed to think otherwise as he huffed out a small laugh, smiling ever so slightly. So, what you waiting for? Oh, I'm waiting for my friend. I think he's supposed to pick me up, but he might be running late, so he doesn't exactly seem like the type to be on time. Izuku mumbled the last part to himself. Sorry, what was the last part? Quite didn't catch that. Shinzo shifted his weight so his ear was closer to Izuku. It was nothing, just talking to myself. Izuku brushed off forced laughter. Shinzo shrugged and put his fists into his pockets. I'm waiting for my dads. Their jobs run late, so I have to wait here for a bit. I don't mind all that much though. It's kind of peaceful once everyone else leaves. If you think you're going to be here for a while, I recommend checking the space between G-Maid and B. There is a cozy little bench spot there. Shinzo pointed over his shoulder to the direction of the mentioned gyms. Thanks, but I don't think I'll need it today, but it's nice if I have to wait for a while. Or maybe even a good spot to eat lunch. Izuku smiled up at the boy. I normally eat lunch there. If you ever want to join me, feel free. His tone was hesitant, as if he was expecting Izuku to turn him down and laugh in his face. The invite made something warm spread through Izuku's chest. He couldn't remember the last time someone had invited him to eat with them. He doesn't even know if he ever been invited to eat with someone. That sounds nice. Izuku looked down at his intertwined fingers. Maybe I'll stop by. The second time around, the silence was comfortable, as both boys gave themselves a moment to think. Izuku was thinking about how he might have a real friend when his attention was stolen by a high-pitched whistle. Izuku whipped his head up, and Shinso started beside him. The purple boy started to look around for what had caught Izuku's attention, but was unable to see Shirakumo's waving at Izuku from across the gate. Oh, my friends are here. I gotta go, Izuku said to still confused Shinso. The taller teen stopped looking round. Alright, see you tomorrow then? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Izuku nodded. Izuku waved at Shinso and started to make his way over to Shirakumo, missing the glare Shinso sent his way when Izuku began speaking to the ghost. You ready to grab the meal plan? Shirakumo asked as they made their way down the street. Izuku found himself nodding again. The ghost seemed to be pretending the earlier argument didn't happen, so Izuku was going to do that too. How far away is it? Izuku asked, picking up the pace to match his speed to Shirakumo's. It's not too bad. Shirakumo made a so-so gesture with his hand. How far away do you live? Is there a certain time you need to be home? Izuku shook his head, curls bouncing with emotion. No, I'm good to stay out as late as I want. My house isn't too far away. I can walk, but if it gets late, then I'll probably just take the train. I don't normally walk though. The trains are too crowded for me. Shirakumo nodded in understanding. Yeah, I get it. Anyways, it's just over and around this corner. Izuku complied, following the ghost to his hiding spot and hopefully to a solution to some of his problems. Izuku sat in his dingy apartment late that night. He was currently flipping through the pamphlet that Professor Mike had given him. As his teacher had said, there were a few classes crossed out. Izuku was a little disappointed, as there was an analysis class that the third years could take that was off limits to Izuku. There was also a support course class that Izuku wished he could take, but he had to actually be in the support course to take that one. Izuku had all the possible options written down on one of the pages in his notebook. He had crossed out the classes he knew he really didn't want to take, like the sewing class and the marketing class. What you thinking about? Shirakumo said from his position beside Izuku. For some reason, the ghost had insisted he follow the younger boy home after his little escapade, and there was nothing Izuku could have done to stop him, so he hadn't complained. Yamada-sensei gave me the option to choose a different course, so I don't have to sit around in English. I'm just looking through the options. Izuku explained as he motioned to the paper he had been scribbling on. He pushed it closer to Shirakumo, who he started to lean closer to get a better view. Ooh! These are interesting. Which one are you thinking of taking? Shirakumo passed the list back when he was done reading. Izuku shrugged. I'm not sure. I really wish I could take the analysis course, but it's for third years. Shirakumo wiggled his eyebrows. I bet they would let you take that class if you just showed them these notebooks. Although I doubt there's much they could teach you. The analysis you do is so good, I bet you could teach that class. A glare from Izuku had all that was needed for Shirakumo to shut his mouth. I feel like it was just yesterday when we talked about how I am not showing these to anyone, Izuku teased, raising an eyebrow. Oh wait, it was! The ghost huffed and began to float onto his back, like one of those sunbathers on the pool chairs. Izuku snickered and returned back to his list, crossing two more classes of his list. Izuku couldn't decide between the remaining 6 classes, so he began to create a list of pros and cons. Hey, when do your parents get back home? It's been a good 4 hours since school ended, and if I had a stomach, I would be starving, Shirakumo asked, now having moved on to trying to hold one of Izuku's spare pens. Oh, they won't be coming home. I live alone, Izuku said absent-mindedly, not looking up from his notebook. He was able to finish the list of pros he had been writing before his train of thought was broken by a loud "What?" Izuku begrudgingly peeled his eyes off his messy handwriting. Shirakumo had moved from his position on the floor and was staring dumbstruck at Izuku. You're only in your first year of high school. Why are you living alone? Where are your parents? Shirakumo questioned frantically, his hands waving around in wild movements. Izuku shrugged, which only seemed to rattle the ghost further. My dad left when I was really little, so to be honest, I don't even remember him. I ran away from my mom a few years ago. It wasn't a good home. Izuku watched as the ghost processed the new information. So, why didn't you go into foster care or call CPS? Surely you know that they have been easier. Surely that would have been easier than living on your own. Shakumo's brows furrowed slightly. I'm quirkless, remember? Izuku turned back to his notebook. The police doesn't really care about abuse cases surrounding the quirkless. Nobody would have taken the case. And in rare occasion where someone did, I most likely wouldn't have lasted long in foster care. Most quirkless kids in the system run away or die within the first year. So I decided that it would just be easier if I left. Nobody was going to notice, and now I have a house all to myself. Shirakumo looked into Izuku's eyes with a seriousness he had seen before. That shouldn't be the case. I'm sorry all this stuff happened to you for something you couldn't control. Nobody deserves to live on their own at 15, not even villains. A soft smile crept its way into Izuku's face, and Shirakumo returned it with ease. Thanks, Shirakumo, Izuku said as he stood up. The ghost also stood. Have you been calling me Shirakumo this whole time? You're the only person I can actually talk to. Call me Oboro. Izuku felt his eyes begin to water. But, but The young teen had never actually been given permission to call someone by their first name before. The only person Izuku had ever called by their first name was Kachan, and that was only because calling three people Bakugo got pretty confusing pretty fast. When Oboro's smile brightened, Izuku felt the first tear begin to make its way down his cheek. Okay, Izuku finally settled on. I'll call you Oboro as long as you call me Izuku. Sounds good. Oboro nodded before holding out his arm and offering a hug. You don't have to if you don't want to, but the offer's open. Izuku stared at the ghost's arms for a moment before pitching sideways into the embrace, letting himself be hugged for the first time in a while. Izuku walked into class next morning extremely well rested. He had actually fallen asleep last night after crying his eyes out on Oboro's shoulder. He had woken up in his bed. The ghost has been nowhere to be seen. The good night's sleep had done wonders for Izuku, and he had only been slightly nervous when he handed Prison Mike a piece of paper with the course he had chosen to replace English written down. Izuku had heard that a good night's sleep was good for relieving stress, but he really didn't think it was true until now. Izuku had ended up deciding that first aid class covered in the hero course would be the most useful. He would still have to attend English on the days the heroes didn't have first aid training, but he wasn't expected to do any assignments. He had ended up settling on the first aid because it was useful in multiple careers, and it was also helpful for patching his own wounds. Izuku didn't know how many injuries he would have started coming home with if his quirk status was somehow revealed, but it was nice to be prepared for when it started getting bad. Izuku had nodded to Shinso when he walked by, but the purple-haired boy had only glared at him. Izuku was almost certain that this was a glare of hatred, not self-deprivation. He had enough experience with the former to know when he was disliked. It dampened Izuku's mood slightly. He had really been hoping that he and Shinshu could become friends, but he was used to being disappointed, so it wasn't enough to ruin his day. When President Mike had started his lecture, Izuku had pulled out his analysis notebook. He didn't have any commissions that needed to be worked on, so he began working to complete an analysis on Mountain Lady he was doing for fun. Izuku managed to get a decent amount of work done, and halfway through the class, Prison Mike had dropped Izuku's new schedule on his desk. Peace and quiet wasn't something Izuku had been able to feel for a while, which is why he wasn't super surprised when Izuku floated through the door with an aura of panic surrounding him. The ghost locked eyes with Izuku and immediately beelined to his desk. Izuku, I need your help. 1A is being attacked by villains right now, and nobody knows, and there are thousands of them, and there is a kid fighting by himself, and the students are in serious danger. Oboro's breathing was erratic, and he was borderline hyperventilating. And I know you don't think the teachers will believe you, and I don't want anyone to know about your quirk, and they'll die if you don't do anything, so please help them. Izuku held up his hands and waited until Oboro was watching. Okay, I will help. I have a plan, but I need you to let me finish explaining before you interrupt me, or we will never get anywhere. Understood? Izuku signed faster than he usually would, so it was slightly messy, but Oboro understood the message and nodded. I am not going to tell anyone about my quirk. Izuku held up his hand when he saw Oboro's mouth open to protest. When Oboro's jaw shut with a click, it's too risky. There is a high chance Yamada-sensei will just think it's schizophrenia, if he thinks that, then he will dismiss the idea. If that happens, then he won't believe anything I say, and I won't be able to get help. There's a high chance that they will think I'm some sort of spy that was working with the villain group. I'll be booted out of UA, and all of my life will be ruined because no good school is going to hire someone expelled from one of the best schools in the country. Oboro frowned. Okay, that makes sense, but how are you going to tell everyone? When I could die before someone realizing what's wrong. If there's something we can do, then I want to at least try. I have a plan, Izuku signed to the ghost. UA has lots of money. Lots of money means a lot of access to resources. When I was doing my research, I came across a spreadsheet of all the purchases UA makes. A decent portion of the funds go to powering the school, as well as maintaining the emergency generators. I think UA has about 5 of them. It's great that you know all of this, but I don't really see how it's going to help us, Oboro said impatiently. Izuku made sure his teacher was preoccupied before replying. If UA has lots of generators, then it would be suspicious if stuff started happening to the electricity. I can lend you some of my energy, and you can flicker as many lights as you can. All I have to do is mention that it's suspicious, then Yamada-sensei will alert someone. They'll have to check just in case, and then they'll realize something is wrong. Oboro nodded. Oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. But how do you travel energy to me? Izuku gestured for Oboro's arm. The ghost complied and placed his wrist in the grip of the younger boy. Izuku closed his eyes and focused on the energy inside of him. He imagined pushing the energy towards the ghost. He had been able to transfer his energy to a few ghosts, but most of them weren't very trustworthy, so he didn't have much practice. Izuku knew he had succeeded when Oboro gasped in surprise. Whoa, this is wicked! It feels better than when I was alive. Way to rub it in, Izuku signed to the ghost. All the energy had felt earlier in the day was now inside of the ghost. He was grateful for the sleep he had gotten last night. If Izuku hadn't slept, well, he wouldn't have enough energy left, and probably would have passed out on his desk. Izuku Oboro winced and rubbed the back of his neck. Sorry, Izuku huffed. Just get to work. Go into the center of the school so you can mess with the most lights possible, but make sure you get my classroom. I won't be able to say anything if I'm not supposed to know what's happening. Now go. Izuku shooed the ghost to make in the direction of the door. Oboro gave a mock salute before floating through the door, moving faster than Izuku had ever seen. Izuku waved to the ghosts back. When Izuku turned to the side, one of his classmates was staring at him. Izuku swallowed and nervously smiled at the girl. Her eyes narrowed slightly before she turned back to her work. Izuku tried his best not to fidget as he waited for Oboro to begin messing with the lights, but his endeavor was fruitless as he began lightly tapping on his desk. A cry of alarms could be heard all across UA when the lights finally began to flicker. Professor Mike stopped his lecture and looked up at the light. Well, little listeners, it looks like we're having a wee bit of trouble with the lighting systems right now. I'm sure Nezu will get it fixed lickety-split. So there is no need to worry. He flashed his students with a blighting grin. Anxiety bubbled in Izuku's chest as he raised a shaky hand. He hoped this worked. President Mike pointed at him, giving him the A-OK to speak. I don't mean to deny what you're saying, but, doesn't UA have like 1,000 backup generators? Wouldn't one of them have kicked in by now? Izuku looked down at his desk, fiddling with his fingers. I wouldn't ever suggest that UA doesn't have the best defenses. I was just wondering if it would be some sort of work doing this. President Mike smiled and you do make a good point, little listeners. I'll just give Nezu a quick call and ask him if anything's amiss. You dig? Izuku nodded. Izuku watched as his teacher pulled out a cell phone and relayed the important information to Nezu. President Mike waited for a moment as the principal replied, and then his eyes widened. Izuku could see a flick of panic in his teacher's expression as he pocketed his cell phone. Alright, we have an infiltration I'm needed for. Classroom is in charge. Stay in classroom, I won't be long. And then, with an impressive speed, President Mike ran out of the classroom. A loud chatter immediately broke out, and the class rep quickly tried to calm everyone. Izuku was too relieved to pay attention to what was being said. He sat at his desk and made sure to take deep breaths. He had done it. The students of Class 1A were safe because he had done something, and he hadn't even had to tell anyone about his quirk. Izuku didn't know if he could handle another person calling him crazy and sending him away. Lucky for him, the plan had worked. Oboro didn't come back. Not that Izuku had really expecting him to. The ghost was most likely busy making sure everyone involved in the attack was okay. He might even have a little bit of energy stored up to provide some actual help. Eventually, President Mike came back to help dismiss his students, letting them know that UA would be taking a day off to recover and find a flaw within their security system that had allowed someone to infiltrate UA unknown. He even made sure to take a moment to thank Izuku for noticing the issue with the lights, and therefore letting the staff know that the attack was taking place. Oboro came back a few minutes after President Mike, also thanking Izuku and then offering to walk him home. Normally, Izuku would have refused, but he was exhausted and really wanted to take the train. Having Oboro with him on the train would provide some protection against the other ghosts, so Izuku gladly took up the offer. The train ride to and walk to Izuku's apartment was uneventful, which Izuku was eternally grateful for. He didn't know if he would have been able to do anything if he was attacked, especially considering as soon as he crawled into his bed, he was out like a light. Chapter 6. The Ghost of a New Friendship. Oboro was bored. Most people would argue that there was no reason for Oboro to be bored, as he had a very action-packed adventure the day prior. But those people were also alive. and had tasks like reading, or drawing, or even cooking that he could partake in. But because Izuku, but because Oboro was a ghost, he couldn't do any of that stuff. The activities he could participate in were limited to people watching, knocking stuff off counters, and possibly watching TV if someone alive was kind enough to leave it on. But alas, there was no TV for him. But alas, there was no TV for him to watch, and most of the people he enjoyed watching were fast asleep. Knocking stuff off counters or playing with lights was no fun if there was nobody to watch it happen, so Oboro was out of luck. He sat in Izuku's kitchen, trying his very best to attempt to hold a pen. It was going better than it usually did, but still not very well. As if on cue, the pen clattered to the floor and Alberto sighed. You're sounding extra gloomy for a Wednesday morning. Oboro whipped around to find Izuku paddling from his bedroom, the computer tucked under his arm, wearing a shirt that said "Pens" on it. You're finally awake! Did you have a good sleep? Oboro asked, attempting to tip back in his chair, but ultimately phasing through the seat and landing on the floor. Izuku laughed at Oboro's expense. My sleep was wonderful. I never crashed so hard in my life. The younger teen placed his laptop on the small table before taking off to the fridge to grab something to eat. He pulled out a container of leftovers and then he placed it into the microwave to heat up. What are you doing today? Oboro asked, hoping for a way to entertain himself. He was disappointed when Izuku shrugged. Not sure. Might get some analysis work done. I don't have many commissions due though. Maybe I'll work on the support gear I was working on. The kid at Kusarigima I was working on needs some improvements. And it keeps short circumcising, and maybe I can. Izuku was consumed by a storm of muttering. Oboro couldn't make out anything being said. Or, Oboro cheered, clapping his hands together. Izuku shut his mouth and sat across from Oboro to start eating. We could do your first training class. I have absolutely nothing to do today, and it sounds like you don't either. Unless you start tinkering, that is. Oboro was almost blinded by the sparks in Izuku's eyes. Can we? He shouted, dropping his chopsticks and abandoning his chair. Sure, but it's the least I can do after you helped me out yesterday. Oboro sat back down and went to pick up the pen again, with a little more success than he was having earlier. But finish your food first. It's bad to train on an empty stomach. The younger teen complied, eagerly stuffing his mouth. When the container was empty, Izuku chucked it into the sink and ran into his room to change into something more suitable for training. When he emerged, he was wearing a tight tank top and gym shorts. I really need to get a new gym shirt, Izuku complained, picking at the tight fabric, squeezing his torso. Overall focus was broken, and the pen he was holding clattered to the floor. We could stop at the store first if you need it. He wasn't looking at Izuku when he said that. Izuku shook his head. No, it's alright. I'll just pick up a new one when I go out. I need to buy another notebook anyways. When Oboro turned around, whatever replied he was prepared was lost, as he eyed the scars covering Izuku's arms. The ghost knew he shouldn't be staring, but the sheer volume of the scars was extremely concerning. Izuku was confused at first, but quickly grew nervous when he realized Oboro had been staring at his arms. All the calm energy Oboro had been feeling was gone, and he was absolutely fuming. The boy was only 15, and he had more scars than a retired pro. And to think it was all because he didn't possess some magical ability. But Oboro could see his anger was making Izuku nervous, so he took a few deep breaths for the teen's sake. Sorry. Oboro apologized after a moment, breaking the tension in the air. It's, uh, it's fine, Izuku stuttered, hugging himself and covering most of his scars. The ghost did not respond, instead changing topics to get the day moving. We should probably get going before all the good spots are taken up, he said, waving Izuku over as he faced to the door. Because Izuku was not a ghost, he had to take an extra minute to lace his shoes and actually walk out the door, making sure to lock it on his way out. Oboro led Izuku through the busy streets of Musutafu, holding his hands to keep him from getting lost in the crowd. It was around noon, so everyone was walking to whenever they had planned to eat lunch. Oboro didn't mention Izuku's heightened nerves as they waved through the crowd. Both boys made sure to stay as far away from other people as possible. It was enjoyable for Oboro to walk through random people, and Izuku just didn't really trust anyone enough to let them get close. When the two finally arrived at the destination, Oboro let go of Izuku's hand. The latter whipped to sweat, covering his hands onto his shorts. Alright, you. The first thing I'm going to teach you is how to properly fall. Oboro clapped his hands together. Izuku raised an eyebrow. How to properly fall? He questioned. Yep, one of the most important parts of fighting is getting back up when you're knocked down. So this will help you make sure you're actually able to get back up. When Oboro received a nod of understanding from the young teen, he continued. Okay, so position your feet like this. The younger boy tried to mirror the elder's stance, which was almost perfect except for the unbalanced weight. Oboro helped Izuku correct his form before moving on to the next step. The teens continued like this for a while. Izuku was a quick learner and was easily able to pick up on the moves. Oboro only needed to correct his form a few times, and once it was corrected, it had never had to be done again. Izuku seemed to remember every tip and trick Oboro fed him. When Oboro was satisfied with Izuku's falling ability, he moved on to teaching the boy how to properly punch, so he wouldn't actually end up breaking his thumbs or trying to defend himself. The boy was also quick to pick that up, only having to remind once to keep his thumbs untucked. The two boys were so engrossed in the training that they hadn't realized just how long they had been doing it until the sun had started to set. Both teens had huge smiles on their faces, and Izuku walked away with knowledge on how to basically defend himself. And if Oboro had complimented the boy while ruffling his hair, well, then nobody needed to know. Hitoshi was upset. Most people would think he was upset about the recent attack on his school and one of his dad's classes. Those people would only be semi-correct, because Hitoshi wasn't very happy that his dad had been injured, but he would also be very mad at the certain green boy that had sat behind him. Hitoshi had thought that the boy might have been like him. Like, he was almost positive that the jumpiness and nervousness Midori had was because of some sort of discrimination the boy had faced. But some part of Hitoshi that thought the boy might have just been bullied for a villain's quirk. just like Hitoshi had been. That's why he had approached Midoriya the previous day. The boy had been waiting for someone at the front gate. Hitoshi didn't know who because he never actually seen the person. When Midoriya had run away from Hitoshi, claiming that the person he was waiting for had arrived, Hitoshi had knew that he was wrong in his assumptions. It was obvious that Midoriya hadn't been just genuinely afraid, but that he had been afraid of Hitoshi and his quirk. He didn't know how Midoriya knew about his quirk, but he had a hunch. One of his bullies had told the entire class as soon as had gotten the chance. So, there Hitoshi sat, gloomily picking at his dinner while his two dads watched him. Hitoshi was oblivious to the worried looks they shared. The teen looked up when one of his dads tapped on the table. Toshi, are you alright? Hisashi asked, his hand remaining resting in the center of the table. I'm fine, Hitoshi grumbled, still punching around the vegetables on his plate. He looked back to watch his food grew cold. Because his eyes were on his plate, Hitoshi missed Hisashi's frown deepening. Are you sure? You've barely touched your food and you seem upset about something. Hitoshi's other dad piped up. We won't force you to talk about anything, but we're here to listen if you want to. His arms were lightly bandaged, and he had a patch of gauze taped to his cheek. Hitoshi took a deep breath and dropped his chopsticks. Do you remember the green-haired boy that I told you about? I think his name was Midoriya. Both parents nodded. I tried to talk to him the other day. We were both waiting at the gate. At first it seemed that it went well. He didn't seem any more nervous than he usually is, maybe a little bit less. But at one point he had told me that the person he was waiting for had arrived, and when I tried to look who it was, there was no one there. He had lied to my face, so get out of talking to me. Shota frowned and opened his mouth to respond, but Hisashi bit him through it. I don't think he was lying. It's probably just his The man was cut out by a harsh elf blow from Shota. When Hisashi realized what he had been saying, his eyes went wide. Oh my goodness, Hitoshi, pretend I didn't say that. You were definitely not supposed to hear that. Hisashi was normally better at keeping students' information private, but they had only recently adopted Hitoshi, so he wasn't really used to censoring himself at home. Hisashi looked at Hitoshi in the eyes with a rare seriousness. Hitoshi, you can't go telling anyone about that. You're not supposed to even know that. I just slipped up. Shota nodded beside his husband. I won't. Hitoshi agreed. He took a moment to process the new information he was accidentally given. It was definitely a shock to Hitoshi. Midoriya hadn't struck Hitoshi as unordinary. He had wondered if Midoriya had practiced hiding his schizophrenia from people. Hitoshi knew better than anyone else that people were cruel, and that there was a chance that Midoriya had been bullied in the past for his illness. Hitoshi frowned, grew slightly. Can't people take medication for that? So they don't hallucinate and all that freaky stuff? Hitoshi rotated his wrist in a circle before taking a bite of his dinner. Some of them can, but some people have allergies or medical conditions that prevent them from taking meds. And medications aren't always a cure. It just helps prevent some symptoms. Even Midoriya does take medication, it may not be able to get rid of all his hallucinations. Shoda informed, taking a sip of water. We can't tell you if he's on medication or not, as it is a further breach of privacy. But if you want to know more, I recommend just asking him. Don't be nosy though. Shora glared at Hisashi while he talked. The blond man looked incredibly guilty. I won't be, Hitoshi confirmed, take, taking his dad's words to heart. After finishing his food, Hitoshi got up to wash his dish. His dads were having a conversation in the kitchen, but he was too busy mulling over his thoughts to pay any attention. Hitoshi felt really bad for the way he had treated Midoriya in class. He had felt slightly guilty when Midoriya's face had fallen after Hitoshi was called glaring boy. But he felt 10 times more guilty now. He knew Midoriya didn't do anything wrong. He would have to apologize in the morning. And that's it for chapter 5 and 6. Also, um I'm sorry if any yawning or any noises like that remained in the audio. I will try to get them all out, but it's 2:30 a.m. and I'm really tired. And I don't know when I will be able to edit this. So yeah. I hope you enjoy. Also, if you would like to see the layout of Izuku's apartment, then the link of the fic is in the bio, and there you can find all the links of what the author made. Let me know if you want to have like the double, if you prefer the double chapters, or if it would be preferred to do one chapter per episode. But yeah, anyways, I thank you for listening and have a great night or day. Don't be scared to comment. I love comments. I love reading all of them. And bye bye.